For many of us collage artists and junk journal makers who like to use vintage ephemera in our creations, we're always on the lookout for good paper sources. Today I'm going to show you how to find it, trade it, or make it if you don't have access to a supply of vintage ephemera. Why do people enjoy collecting and creating with vintage ephemera? Well, vintage ephemera is paper treasure. It's a way to get a glimpse into the past. What makes it so appealing to work with? Often these papers have appealing typography and designs, provide interesting facts and illustrations, and can be quite valuable. On the practical side, ephemera is usually small, it's easily sent through the mail, and kind of easy to store because it's flat. If you like using vintage ephemera in your creations, but maybe don't have access to any where you are, here's what you can do about it. First, you can look for and find papers in a vintage style around you. For example, look in a grocery store. Let me show you what I found. Right, so on my desk I have a few things that are from a grocery store. First of all is this flyer from Trader Joe's, and every month they put out a new flyer. When you go in the store, you can ask for them, or sometimes you'll see them in the checkout area. When you're paying for your groceries, they'll have a stack of them. So in them, they have often some very interesting illustrations that are done in a vintage style that you can cut out and use in your own work. Like this hand, for example, I could probably use on the back. There are these birds, kind of an interesting choice of color for them, but it's possible to make it work in a collage somehow. If you don't have access to Trader Joe's going into their physical store, if you go onto their website, you are able to sign up for their email e-flyer, which I believe will include many of the illustrations that come in the physical flyer. So you could always use something like that and print out something interesting if it happens to come. Here I have a couple of different glue books, and if I show you this one, here is a tag made from a cracker box. I believe the company is called Late July. And their covers of their boxes are kind of done in a vintage style. So I liked this one. I cut it out and then I use it in my eclectic page glue book as a page. Additionally, here, this is from a jar of jam or jelly. So this is an kind of a illustration done in a vintage style that could be used in a piece of art. Another kind of example that I like to use are wine labels. This is just one example. I will put a link in the description box of a really quick, it's a really quick video of how I get wine labels off of glass bottles. It's a trick I learned because I really do like to use them. And this collage is the one that I put together in that video that I linked. So wine bottles, wine labels are really good. Look, here is something that I cut out of a Trader Joe's flyer, one of these. And I did not color these. These were already came colored, and I thought that was just the perfect combination for the colors that I had here, right? So those are some examples of things that you can find in a grocery store. My second tip for getting vintage ephemera is to trade for it. There are a lot of art groups online, particularly Facebook. Here I'm on a Facebook page on my laptop. If you come on the left-hand side or look on the left-hand side, you will see these menu options. If you click on groups, here you can do a search, and let's type in something like ephemera and then more specific vintage. So you will get a list of groups, vintage ephemera, books and stamps by Seller Trade. That looks interesting. If you click see all, you will see a lot of groups with the description, and it's important that you read the description to see what is the right fit for you. If you join one of these groups, you'll see what are the parameters for trading provided by the administrators. If you're not interested in any online groups, check to see if there are any art groups that meet in your area. This could be through the library or through the local community center. My third tip for acquiring vintage ephemera is to make your own. And you might be thinking, Marguerite, if I make my own vintage ephemera, then it's not vintage. Yes, this is true, but you can make very creative pieces in a vintage style that will work just as well or even better than the real thing. Let me show you. All right, so what I have on my desk are some rubber stamps and some different kinds of papers. What I like to do is, the first suggestion I have for making your own ephemera is to take something like book page, which is something that most of us can get a hold of vintage book pages, usually from a used book sale or free stuff at the library. You can find some book pages. And you use the text, of course, but if you have extra pieces or if you have book page that has this large area of margin, these are great places to rubber stamp on and then use those pieces in your work, in your artwork. My suggestion is to stick with very traditional colors, either blue or black, the darker blue or darker black. And let me show you what it looks like. Of course, you know, every book is going to be a little bit different, but you'll get the general idea. So if you tear this out, this is a really nice, clean illustration on a vintage piece of paper, right? And as I said, if you use a traditional color like blue or black, who's to say whether or not it was, originally on the paper or not? It's a really nice way to add something to your collage or your junk journal when you can just stamp something onto a vintage piece of paper. Now, here is a regular old napkin from a fast food restaurant. These napkins are nice because you can pull apart the layers, and it's a nice kind of craft color. It's a color almost of a newspaper. So these are also something else that you can experiment with. Another idea is using tea bags. You have a tea bag with your black tea or fruit tea, and then you undo them and you open them, dry them out, of course, scrape out the tea. And then you can do things like stamp on them. Here, I'll put a white background underneath so that you can see. You can stamp on them, or you can use them as an overlay. I saw someone else on YouTube, they use them to cover over a playing card like a character that, or like a Jack, Queen, King. She put this over the top. I guess she used some kind of matte medium and then used this red over the top, and it just gives it an aged look right away, right? So experiment with tea bags. If you have paper that is not vintage, you can always ink the paper with one of those sponges and go around the edges. I don't have the correct ink, otherwise I would show you. Usually those are the kind of brown color, walnut, I forgot what the name of the Ranger color is. But if you take one of those sponges and just go around, the thing you have to remember is just not to overdo it. Sometimes it's really easy to just really darken those edges to make the edges stand out. But if you want to age something properly, or to make it look properly aged, I should say, the lighter the better. You want just a very, very subtle amount on the edges. Another suggestion is to print ephemera from the internet. So say, for example, you go onto Etsy, because the Etsy site is where you can find a lot of handmade and created art items for sale. Say you go on Etsy and you purchase some digital downloads of vintage ephemera. Once you have them on your computer, you can print them out and you can use them in your art. One suggestion is to get a hold of paper that you print out your digital copies onto. This is an example. This is technical paper. You know what? I found this at my parents' house not too long ago. I think it was my dad's, and he wasn't using it, so I asked him if I could have it so that I could use it to print out some ephemera. It's super, super thin. It's almost like tracing paper. And if you print out some really good, clear images, it doesn't matter if they're in color or black and white, and you're using this really nice kind of vintagey paper that's already has a little bit of color change to it, you really could make some really nice reproductions with it. Okay, so that is another suggestion as well. Print out from your computer. Okay, so I mentioned that you can make ephemera that could be even better than the real thing. What did I mean by that? What I meant was that you can make adjustments based on the need of your project. So here is my example again of this collage with the wine label. And in this collage, I was looking to add some very specific elements that matched what I was working with. So I had this image with the plant flowers, and I wanted to match the colors. So that's what I did here with these postage stamps. Here, this, and then this blue here. And because these blues are in the corner, I wanted to add a blue over here. And I had this rubber stamp, and I had a piece of paper, vintage paper, and if you want to add a specific element and you need it to have a specific color, with inks, it's really neat to be able to just choose what color you need and to then use it in your artwork. That's why creating your own can be so much more useful than if you are hunting and hunting, because that's what I did. I was looking and looking through my stash for something that would match in this shade of blue, and I just couldn't find anything, so I actually had to create it. Same with this little piece right here. I had this rubber stamp, I grabbed a piece of something, stamped, tear it out, and there you go. You use it just like that. I hope this gives you some ideas for acquiring your own vintage ephemera. If you have any advice or suggestions, leave them in the comments. I'll see you next time.